Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for inviting me for this webinar. I am a researcher at Stockholm University and Karolinska Institutet in Sweden. So I tell you a little bit about this research and the sickness response. So the first thing, is there immune to brain communication, and why should there be immune to brain communication? Because we have a barrier, a blood-brain barrier that would hinder a lot of these communication pathways. So if you have a white blood cell in the periphery, somewhere in the body, in the bloodstream or in the stomach or wherever, would it be necessary for that white blood cell to communicate with the brain and why? So I'll talk a little bit about what we do to understand that. So we know that when we have exposure to virus or bacteria or other things happening in the body, we have signaling to the brain. And these are inflammatory mediators with a lot of names. And they can be released then into the bloodstream and then actually communicate with the tissue side of the brain or via nerves. So there is a communication pathway that we know more or less exactly how this works. So up to the brain, the signal goes. And for example, the green dots here are the inflammatory mediators, and then you can have bacteria or virus or something else triggering the white blood cell. So this could be something like bacteria, the red little things I did in my PowerPoint presentation there. But it could definitely also be like Epstein-Barr virus or COVID-19 or something else triggering more or less the same sickness response. It's not exactly the same, but generally we have this response when you have some perturbation like that in the body. However, I think I call them, I know this is not like an official term, but I call them sickness signals because it's interpreted by the brain as sickness signals, something in the body telling you that you are sick and that you should change behavior, do things differently. And that's why when the subjective part really kicks in, and it's quite fast actually, this response. I think it's also important to note that this can happen in response to other stimuli that are more perceived from the outside, like outside threat. So a classic stress response actually involves an immune response. So the acute response, when you have acute stress, a threat of some kind, this also actually primes a little bit the immune cells to respond more and also to start release some of these mediators into the bloodstream, changing actually the physiological condition of the body. So I took away some of the molecules here because we don't really know that this is so strong that it actually impacts brain and behavior, but it's very clear in the periphery, very clear also from the stress response. So it's basically that the immune system, it's involved in response to different kind of threats. That's good, like from an evolutionary standpoint. So why is this? Why do we have these functions? Why did they evolve? Because we obviously inherited these systems and responses from our forefathers, so it was good for them at least. Maybe not now, or not as good. So one thing is that the brain, as a master regulator, of course, is involved in actually regulating immune function. And here it can actually like in the stress response, upregulate the immune function, but it can also downregulate and actually dysregulate immune function. I showed it here as downregulation because if you have stronger stress response, it's important to dampen this dangerous response using also the brain machinery. But if you have chronic stress exposure, it seems that you can actually dysregulate the immune cells. So you have this low-grade inflammation with some of these green dots being released into the bloodstream, and that may not be as good in the long term. So immune regulation is one reason we have brain-body, like brain-immune interaction. And another one is then the sickness response, the main topic here. And you have more of the green dots, the inflammatory mediators. Certain areas of the brain are really responsive to these changes in the body. And you have the subjective and objective changes both in brain activity and in behavioral measures. And what comes in here is the classic, like the behaviors or the feelings, the cognitions that you are fatigued, that you have a depressed mood, more or less, some anxiety, you don't want to move, you're less inclined to social interaction. You actually get a little picky. You can interact with people that you really trust or can provide care to you or warmth, but otherwise you don't want to go to cocktail parties, if we summarize what we know. You have increased pain sensitivity and some spontaneous pain also, and you have this switch towards bodily attention. So that seems to be part of it, that you want to care about your body. So the challenge in the body signals to the brain and you turn inwards. So you actually focus more on bodily symptoms, which is good in the short term, right? And why is this good? Here is the answer. The immune system needs energy. It consumes a lot of energy, and especially when you have a fever response, which is part of this response when you have an infection. I think it's important to remember again that it's not only happening during real infection, it's happening during many conditions. When you have the inflammatory activation, you have a signal to the brain, and then you have some of the sickness responses. So what we can do then is that if you have the sickness response, again pictured like this, you have bacteria that enter the body and they are detected by receptors on white blood cells, same as I showed before, but just in another way. You have activation of the cells, you have release of these inflammatory mediators, you have a signaling to the brain, and within an hour or so, you have a sickness response mediated by centers in the brain. These centers are central for regulating how active you want to be, where you focus attention and your emotions. So you can actually have a trick here. You can take part of the bacteria, not the full bacterium, because you don't want to make people infected. So what we do and others do is to understand the sickness response and how the brain changes and who is sensitive, etc., by using a small part of the bacterium and then inject that one. Then there is no infection because there is no pathogen. It's not full bacteria, live bacteria. It's only part of it. But the immune system responds having this signaling. It can look like this. So this is me. This is my arm. I'm not the doctor, I tell you. I'm the patient here. I pretend to be patient, or at least I get the sickness response for 4 or 5 hours when this doctor injects this part of the bacteria into my bloodstream. It takes 1 hour and then I feel, oh no, something's wrong. And then I have this response, the sickness response with fatigue and depressed mood, etc. So then we can understand what's happening in the brain, what parts of the brain are involved, what cognitive changes do we have. You feel fatigued, but in what way? Is it like more mental or is it more physical fatigue? What kind of negative mood? Who is actually affected? Because we don't really know why people are so some people are so insensitive to these signals, and some other people are more sensitive. So these are areas that we really try to understand by investigating brain responses, behavior predictors, etc., etc. Perceived threat. And lastly, what we are trying to do, and many of us in this field, it's to understand what's happening when you have this adaptive response, what actually made our forefathers to live through infections and pass the genes over to, well, people like myself, for example. And when and for whom would it turn into maladaptiveness, so that you actually are not helped? Because if you have a long-term sickness, why should you have reduced motivation to do physical exercise or feel pain or social disconnect? It wouldn't make sense in the long run, but why can it get stuck as we think it is? And that actually then the switch from short term to long term. So that's where we are, many of us in this field, understanding this gap that we actually have here. If you're more fearful and you maybe worry about this at night or before bedtime, this could make you feel worse and more stressed, and that can be, we don't know actually, but it can be one pathway to actually not turning down this signal, the sickness signal, so to speak. It's understanding how the brain interprets this, and I mean that in with biological outcomes, looking on the signal, the inflammation, the levels of inflammatory mediators released. We look on what parts of the brain and how much are they up or down regulated, and what could predict a stronger sickness response or actually a stronger response in anxiety. We at least think that this is like a driver of not shutting, because the system is really there to be activated, should be a strong response, but then it should be downregulated. And anxiety may be one of these factors that actually makes you want to act too much on the appraisal of the bodily condition. As it's not like I have pain because I had physical exercise. It's like I have pain because I have a mortal disease or something really threatening. So the interpretation and the anxiety and the drive to really act and focus on the symptoms, these are factors that we that we really try to investigate, among other things. So I think, but one observation that I had then when I did this the first time, the injection, was that it was such a difference for me, because I knew, I worked for years to have this model established. And then I almost liked it. I felt like I was sick in a interesting way, and a good day at job, and at 5 I will have a painkiller and go home. And then it really struck me the difference that when you don't know what it is, and of course that makes you fearful and anxious. I do. I need to tell you that I don't only make people sick. I also try to make people healthy, and so we do cognitive behavioral therapy treatments and similar techniques for severe long-standing fatigue. Looking now back to this basic research, when we make healthy people sick, with the intention to make sick people healthy, I must say that. So with this model, we try to look on brain centers that respond a lot to the immune signal. And there, I didn't talk about it, but one center that was actually shown in one of my pictures is especially interested in bodily changes. So it's responding to that. And especially in the back of this part of the brain, like it's on the inside here somewhere. And when the signal travels forward, more and more of the interpretation as subjectivity comes in, like, am I sick, am I old, or did I just have physical exercise or a vaccine shot? More of these thoughts and memories and feelings come into play. And then the brain can down or upregulate the signal depending on context and interpretation. So these like brain-centered explanations is part of what we do. And we look on prediction, that is like expectations of how sick you will be. So there we're doing a large study right now trying to follow up on our earlier findings to see what we actually had indications of, that some kind of expectation was actually a predictor of getting more anxious and more sick.